Usually, if you're arguing like criminal justice shit, you're arguing with Americans who unironically believe that criminals are like subhuman degenerates who do not deserve to live.
I usually say this at the end of my videos, but this time I'm going to say it at the beginning. I'm a micro YouTube channel with a small subscriber base that focuses on issues of post-liberal conservatism as well as criminal justice issues. If this sort of subject interests you, then you should add me to your subscriber list if you're not already subscribed. Thanks. Ever since I created my last video criticizing Vaush, the YouTube algorithm has been desperately trying to push his videos to me. Sorry YouTube, I'm not real interested in watching an obese man play Majora's Mask. However, I noticed recently in one of my recommendations that Vaush had decided to do a video on criminal justice. Given how stupid his views on human slavery and sex trafficking were in the last video, I thought that this would be pretty funny, that he would say some incredibly stupid things. And sure enough, I watched the video and it was absolutely ridiculous. Now, before we get into my response, I'll go ahead and admit there are some rather serious problems with the US criminal justice system. In fact, I've created entire videos on this YouTube channel addressing some of those issues. That being said, what Vaush fails to understand is that just because there are problems with the criminal justice system doesn't mean that by necessity it's the criminal justice system itself which is the cause of all those problems. Now, it's a complicated issue and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but to give a real concise reason why we have such a problem with incarceration rate in the United States, I would say that the liberal society and culture, or perhaps more accurately, I should say anti-culture, that exists in the United States cultivates citizens who are deeply irresponsible, immoral, and ultimately immature. You see, the United States is a country of man-children. There is no better representation of this than Vaush himself. Vaush does not dress like an adult man. He does not look like how an adult man should look. And he certainly doesn't act like an adult man. But let's skip ahead to the video. Let's cover the most factually incorrect things that Vaush brings up in this video. And just to give you a little bit of background on what's going on in this video, Vaush is reading Bernie Sanders' proposed criminal justice reforms.
But actually, because to those of you who are unfamiliar with it, I want to give you a model of what genuinely transformative policy proposals look like. Not pithy liberal reform, but genuine, sick nasty, dank AF, hip zoomer, Minecraft, based and red-pilled reform packages.
Okay, now calm down, Vaush. You do realize, right, that the federal government only locks up a very slim percentage of the number of prisoners in the United States. In fact, there's around 2 million people locked in state prisons or jails, while there's only about 200,000 people in federal custody. If you think that Bernie Sanders getting elected is going to solve any sort of incarceration problem in the United States, then you're extremely naive and short-sighted. Even if Bernie Sanders became president and released every single person in every federal prison, the United States would still incarcerate more people than any other country in the world. Bernie Sanders is not some magical solution to this problem.
We lock up more than 2 million people in America, which is more of our own people than any other country on earth. And that does not include another 5 million who are under the supervision of the correctional system. So that's 7 million people in total, guys.
Whoa, hold on a second. 5 million people are on probation in the United States versus 2 million who are locked up in prisons? Let's think about the implications of this for a second. It seems like only in a small minority of cases, the worst of the worst, does the United States send its criminals to prison. In fact, for every 2 people the United States sends to prison, that means 5 people got probation. That seems pretty tolerant. It seems like the United States is pretty lenient to most of its criminals. But here comes Vaush just combining those numbers together. You would think Vaush, someone who advocates for less incarceration, who wants to see criminal justice reforms, wouldn't criticize the United States for putting people on probation rather than sending them to prison. That would be hypocritical and stupid for him to do that. But you just saw the video, right? That's what he did.
Hundreds of thousands are incarcerated people in America, have not been convicted of a crime, and are solely in jail because they cannot afford their bail. We are criminalizing poverty.
Hundreds of thousands of people are not solely in jail because they can't afford their bail. There are actually Supreme Court legal precedents that explain the constitutional requirements that the court is obligated to consider when setting bail. And those Supreme Court precedents apply to all of the states. This means that no one is ever solely in jail because they cannot afford their bail. If they're not able to post their bail, if their bail is at a certain dollar amount, it's because the court weighed the constitutional factors, including whether the defendant is a flight risk, whether they pose a risk to the victim or other witnesses in the case, the seriousness of the crime, whether the evidence is strong or weak. All of those things courts are obligated to consider when setting bail. So when Vaush recklessly just states that the only reason people are in jail prior to their trials is because they can't afford their bail, he's lying. He's being disingenuous.
The district attorney will bring a charge or multiple charges against you. You will meet with in court to be told those charges, and you will be given a court date. That court date is when the actual proceeding begins for when you saying guilty, not guilty, blah, 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 or when you argue your case. So up until that court date, you are kept in jail. Sometimes the court date is set quite a long time after you're arrested. Imagine being arrested in January and being told that your court date is in April. Just imagine that. That happens sometimes. That's just a 3.5 month period right there for that you are in jail. You can't do anything. You can't work. Meanwhile, your rent racks up. Meanwhile, your utilities rack up. Meanwhile, your entire life falls behind. If you've got kids, somebody else is going to have to bring them to and from school. If you have a spouse, they'll have to handle themselves on their own. This happens all the time.
Once again, Vaush is just pulling this out of thin air. First of all, whenever someone is booked into a jail, they have to have an initial appearance within 24 hours of their booking. At that hearing, a judge decides what bail the person is going to have. Now, that decision is not necessarily final. Criminal defendants in every single state have the ability to make a motion to the court to have bail reconsidered, even if they already received a certain bail at their initial appearance. When Vaush is saying that there are people just sitting in the jail for 3 or 4 months waiting for a bond hearing, he's not being honest.
97% of cases in the American court system are settled with plea deals. So, my bad. So, of all charges brought, 3% of them on a federal level and 6% on a state level actually go to court. That 3% of federal cases that actually go to court have completely crippled the system. Right now, court dates are set really far behind because our court system can't keep up with a measly 3% of cases actually going to trial. 3% of the total number of people we charge with crimes in this country are enough to completely cripple our court system. If we made this 96%, so 4% of cases brought in a federal level went to court, it would be the end of the American justice system.
What Vaush is doing in this part of the video is extremely Weasley. And let me explain why. Let's say someone who was an ultra-progressive got elected to the position of district attorney. And we're going to call this person Larry Krasner. So let's say that Larry Krasner decides that there are too many people in prison. So what he's going to do is he's going to give every single person charged with a crime a plea to probation. So Larry Krasner then starts pleading out all of the cases. Every single defendant gets a super lenient plea that basically places them on probation. After Larry Krasner starts doing this, crime starts skyrocketing in the community. Everyone knows that they're just going to get probation, so crime levels go through the roof. It gets to the point where Larry Krasner's staff is incredibly overworked. All they're doing all day long is writing up plea agreement after plea agreement to probation. The court dockets become absolutely clogged with people just taking plea agreements and being sentenced to probation. In fact, it becomes so bad that the following situation occurs. One criminal defendant decides to turn down his probation offer. He realizes that going to trial means that if he loses, he's going to have to go to prison, but he decides to take the risk. But because Larry Krasner's office is so overworked pleading out all of these other cases, their line prosecutors are spending all of their time just writing up these plea agreements, just going to courtrooms where people are taking pleas or getting sentenced. They don't have the resources to try this one case. And the system ends up falling apart. Now, Vaush wants you to believe that the tiny few percentage points of people going to trial are the ones that are derailing the entire system. But it could just as easily be the other 97% of people who are pleading out that are actually using up most of the resources of the prosecutor's office. For him to only focus on the percentage of people who want to go to trial is once again another example of Vaush being disingenuous.
This isn't broken in the same way like the schooling system is broken, where like it's really fucked, but it still produces some good outcomes for some people. This is a literally non-functioning system. It does not function.
Is the United States a literally non-functioning system? No, I would disagree with that entirely. I think there's a pretty good example of a literally non-functioning system of criminal justice, and that would be Mexico's criminal justice system. You see, in Mexico, only 4% of crimes that are committed result in convictions. That includes violent crimes and murders. In Mexico, the entire country is plagued by the issue of impunity. People commit crimes and they almost always get away with it. In fact, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago that discussed a heinous murder that occurred in Mexico. The victim was a college student, and for a while she went missing, and then later her decapitated body was found. Mexican police began an investigation, and they ended up making a huge discovery. Apparently, the woman had been set up by her best friend, who was also her classmate at the college. In fact, her best friend was also a member of a large group of people that kidnapped, murdered, tortured, and raped people. And you know what this group also did? They videotaped it. So police found all of these videos where these college students were raping, torturing, and murdering their classmates. You couldn't ask for any stronger evidence than that. Now, this article I read had been written 7 or 8 years after that police investigation had concluded. And according to the article, not one of the people in the group who were on videotape raping, torturing, or murdering this woman or several of her classmates has been convicted of murder or any crime. In fact, no one's been convicted out of any of it. That is a literally non-functioning system. The system of justice we have in the United States, no, it functions quite well compared to many countries.
Black Americans are nearly 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than white Americans. These disparities pervade every aspect of the criminal justice system. Black Americans, especially young black men, are more likely to be stopped by the police, subjected to excessive force, arrested, and jailed than whites. So if you ever wonder why black people fucking hate cops, and why, like, a gangsta rap is super anti-cop, it's for a good fucking reason.
Vaush can complain about black people using weed at higher rates than whites all that he wants, but the fact of the matter is, almost no people are in prison because they had weed. It's something like 80% of people in prison are there for a violent crime, and I'm pretty certain that of the remaining 20%, probably less than 2% would be there for any sort of marijuana violation. Once again, even if Bernie Sanders became president and every single person in prison for marijuana was released, it would not change the fact that the United States incarcerates the most people in the world.
Right now, a person charged with an offense who cannot afford a lawyer is often charged a public defender fee and levied court costs.
Some states may try and charge defendants a public defender fee, but this is effectively meaningless because in 99% of cases, criminals aren't going to pay any of their court fines. In fact, we know that this argument is bullshit based on what happened in Florida. Florida passed a ballot proposition that restored the right to vote to people who had been convicted of felonies. The Republicans that ran Florida's government didn't want these people voting. So what they did is they made a corollary to the ballot proposition that indicated that the felons could vote, but only if they paid all of their fines. The left went absolutely nuts when this happened. Almost no felons would then be able to vote because almost none of them ever pay their fines. The idea that you're going to really reform the criminal justice system by not making people pay fines that they already don't pay doesn't make any sense.
More than 40 states use driver license suspensions as a means of pressuring people to pay various court fees.
What Vaush neglects to point out here is that the reason that people's driver's licenses get suspended because they hadn't paid court fees is because those court fees are related to offenses that are involved with driving cars. If you drive drunk and get caught, if you speed, if you commit traffic violations, and you don't pay any of the court fines, the DMV is going to suspend your license. Those fines only work as a deterrent if you pay them. If people are just going to not pay any of the speeding tickets, not pay any traffic tickets, then what's the whole point of the system at all? There has to be some teeth behind the ticket. If someone doesn't pay their speeding ticket or their DUI fine, there has to be some sort of consequence. Now, of course, these people could be sent to jail, but Vaush doesn't seem to like that. Just like when he was complaining about people being placed on probation, though, suspending someone's driver's license for failing to pay court fees related to driving offenses is an alternative to incarcerating them. It's like Vaush seems to want it both ways. Not only is it unacceptable for the courts to use incarceration to deter people from crime and punish them, but whenever the court does anything to avoid doing that, like putting the person on probation or suspending their driver's license for not paying DUI fines, Vaush has some major problem with it.
Right now, hundreds of thousands of people without a criminal conviction are in jail simply because they couldn't afford bail.
Vaush can call for the end to cash bail, but the issue exists, what will replace it? And whatever replaces it might end up worse from his perspective. Cash bail was invented in medieval England. Prior to the concept of bail being invented, people who committed crimes were just held in the jail till they were tried. People weren't released because they would just run away. Most of the crimes that people could be convicted of in medieval England carried the death penalty. So a judge came up with this idea of cash bail. okay, we'll let you out of custody, but you have to post some sort of bond that makes it certain that we will know that you won't run away. Rather than everyone being locked up in the county jail until trial, people were able to get out of custody prior to trial. And in the event that they did run away, at least the county government got to collect a large bond. The strength of the cash bail system is its flexibility. Bail can be set at any amount. For example, if a poor person commits a crime, the judge can consider their poverty and set bail at a certain amount. So that amount would be a lot of money for an impoverished person, but maybe not a lot of money for a rich person. Likewise, if a rich person commits a crime, the judge can also consider that person's resources and set a much higher bond, something that the rich person would be afraid to lose and would ensure that they would show up in court. So in a system where cash bail has been eliminated, the judge is going to have two decisions to make. Do I release this person or don't I release this person? A lot of people who could have been released on bail are going to be held in custody. And once again, if Vaush's goal is to reduce incarceration, then what he's proposing by ending cash bail doesn't make any sense at all.
Last year, more police officers died of suicide than in the line of duty.
Did Vaush just make a white supremacist hand signal? I'm afraid I'm going to have to report his video to the Anti-Defamation League.
But I'll try my best.
God, man, this guy is so disgusting.
Establish a federal no-call policy, including a registry of disreputable federal law enforcement officers, so testimony from untrustworthy sources does not lead to criminal convictions. Provide financial support to pilot local and state-level no-call lists. So this is literally, some police officers are scumbags. Let's put them on a list so we never use their testimony.
Alright, this is one of the dumbest parts of this video. So Vaush is so excited that Bernie Sanders is going to create this list of problematic police officers. But the fact of the matter is that prosecutors' offices are already required to maintain this. It's called the Brady List. It's from a U.S. Supreme Court opinion called Brady v. Maryland, which says that prosecutor offices are required to maintain these lists. I think it's hilarious that Bernie Sanders includes this in his list of criminal justice reforms because it's literally something that every prosecutor's office in the country is already required to do. The idea that this is some novel criminal justice reform is absolutely hilarious.
So for those of you who are interested, you've probably heard of the term civil asset forfeiture. Civil asset forfeiture literally means the police can just steal your shit.
No, it doesn't. Civil asset forfeiture does not mean that the police can just steal your shit. Vaush acts like he's never even had contact with a police officer before. Anyone who's watching this video, have you ever been pulled over by a cop? Have you ever been stopped by a police officer, questioned, or anything like that? Chances are the answer is probably yes. At one point in time, you probably had some sort of contact with police. And unless you're a drug dealer, I would say the chances are that during that encounter you had with police, the chance that they stole anything from you is extremely low. Civil asset forfeiture was something put into place in the law in order to deal with organized crime. You see, you had certain criminal organizations, let's say a drug smuggling organization, that has a factory that they use to make, let's say, crack cocaine, and cars that they use to drive it to a drop house. The drugs are stored at the drop house, and then the high-level drug dealers who know about the drop house will sell smaller quantities of it to people who deal on the streets. Now, when police and prosecutors would target organized crime like this, they started to notice a pattern emerging. They could prosecute all of these people for their involvement in the drug organization. But as soon as all of these people were locked up in prison, the drug trafficking organization just restarted with new people. The same factory was used to make the drugs. The same cars were used to transport the drugs from the factory to the drop house. And the same drop house was used to store all the drugs. So asset forfeiture laws are methods for the police to use to prosecute tools and objects that are used by criminal organizations.
For real, though, let me give you an example of civil asset forfeiture. Listen, it's a good meme, okay? It's a really good meme, okay? Imagine that you're moving and you don't have much to your name. So you're driving like cross state, and you have like, I don't know, $2,000 in cash on you. You like withdrew a bunch. It's just there. It's like, it's all your money, you know? If you're stopped by a police officer and they ask to search your car, you should always say no. But if you're an idiot and you say yes, and they find those $2,000, they could say, pretty suspicious that you have this in cash, don't you think? Maybe a part of a drug deal? They'll say as they flip the bills in between their fingers. And then you'll say, oh, no, that's just all the cash that I withdrew. And then the police officer say, well, you can't prove you didn't get it in a drug deal, did you, you boy? So I think we'll be taking this back to the station. We need a new smoothie maker anyway. And then they'll slide that shit into their pocket and drive off with it.
This example that Vaush gives is completely wrong, and it's also racist against Irish people. In order for police to seize something through civil asset forfeiture, they have to prove in court that that object was being used to commit a crime. So no, police can't just take $1,000 from someone simply because they find that to be suspicious. Vaush is pulling this example out of his ass. There is no real case where something like this actually happened.
Yeah, they can even do it if they think you'll use it in something illegal. In order for you to get that back, you have to prove legally that it was not used and will not be used in any sort of criminal activity, which is A, virtually impossible, B, requires hiring a lawyer and doing a fuck ton of research that is usually so cost prohibitive that you can't actually, there's like no way you can actually do it.
No, you don't. Vaush, that violates due process. You know what due process is, right? You've read the Constitution before? The plaintiff in any sort of civil dispute bears the burden of proof. They have to prove by a preponderance of the evidence whatever wrong that they say the defendant committed against them. Civil asset forfeiture is a type of civil litigation. It has the word civil in the name. Civil asset forfeiture. In an asset forfeiture, the prosecution is the plaintiff. They have to prove that the object was used to commit a crime. And they have to notify anyone whose property rights may be affected by the decision. And those people who may have property rights in the object to be forfeited, they have a right to address the court and challenge the prosecution's case. Now, different states have different burdens of proof for this. In some of them, the proof is preponderance of the evidence, which is the same burden of proof you would have in a civil lawsuit. Other states require the prosecution to go further and prove by either clear and convincing evidence or beyond a reasonable doubt that the object being forfeited was used to commit a crime. However, the way that you describe it, that police can just arbitrarily seize things based on mere suspicion, and then the people with the property interest in the object are then required to prove in court that the object was not being used to commit a crime, that's a complete misrepresentation of how the civil asset forfeiture works.
What the fuck do police even do? They're trained in shooting, I know that, but police are not familiar with the law. They don't like this. I've seen plenty of police who have no fucking idea how the Constitution works, for example.
I think it's hilarious that Vaush criticizes the police for not being familiar with the law, when he literally just completely misstated the law on asset forfeiture, when he didn't even know that prosecutors were required to keep a list of dishonest police officers pursuant to the Brady v. Maryland case. No, police are actually pretty familiar with the law. They're trained on it. It's their job. The person who's completely unfamiliar with the law here is Vaush.
The criminal justice system is rigged. The United States has a criminal justice system that is built to put the profit interests of billion-dollar industries like the bail bondsman over the interests of everyday working people.
No, people aren't betrayed by the bail bond industry. As I stated earlier in this video, the requirement of cash bail was something invented in medieval England. It's not something that was invented by the cash bail bond industry. The general public benefits from the cash bail system because it balances the right for a criminal defendant to be released prior to trial with the risk that a criminal charged with a crime might become a fugitive or try and flee from the jurisdiction or reoffend. The general public is well served by and benefits from the cash bail system.
77% of Black Americans and 73% of Latinos in state prisons had a public defender or court-appointed counsel, yet 75% of county-based public defenders' offices have exceeded the maximum recommended limit of cases per attorney. Create a federal agency to provide support and oversight for state public defensive services. Authorize the Department of Justice to take legal action against jurisdictions that are not meeting their Sixth Amendment obligations.
In response to this, I'm going to quote from Patrick Deneen's book, Why Liberalism Fails. Trying to solve problems caused by liberalism by applying more liberal policies and principles is akin to pouring gasoline on a raging fire. This is what Vaush and Bernie Sanders are advocating for in this portion of the video. The type of jurisdictions that are going to have trouble providing enough public defenders to represent criminals are going to be jurisdictions that are overridden by crime. They're also going to be ones in which poverty is a major problem. So what does Bernie Sanders and Vaush propose that we do to solve this problem? Well, he wants to file lawsuits against these jurisdictions. Basically, he wants to take their limited legal resources and tie them up in some lawsuit filed by the federal government. This is, of course, going to lead to there being even fewer legal resources on the state or local level that can be devoted to the issue of making sure that criminal defendants are well represented. Well, Vaush might retort and say, well, why don't we take resources away from the police or prosecution? But you know what that's going to do? It's going to result in there being more crimes and more criminal defendants. You're just making the problem worse and worse. You can't solve a problem caused by liberalism by applying liberal policies and procedures. Once again, Patrick Deneen's quote is dead on. It's akin to pouring gasoline on a raging fire.
Hey, my brothers out there in chat, are you ready for your fucking broke-ass communities to be built up with the weed money? Are you ready for weed houses, weed streets, weed fire hydrants, weed fucking schools? Are you fucking ready? Weed fire departments.
The whole weed paradise idea is complete bullshit. None of these jurisdictions who legalized marijuana suddenly raked in some magic amount of cash that caused their community to be revitalized. In fact, many of the places where drugs are essentially legal, like Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, are dirtier, dumpier places with major social problems, including disease, rats, and human feces.
Legalize safe injection sites and needle exchanges around the country and support pilot programs for supervised injection sites, which have shown to substantially reduce drug overdose deaths. For those of you who don't know, safe injection sites and needle exchanges are extremely valuable. If you're a junkie, if you're shooting up heroin or whatever, if you're doing your shit, you're gonna do it whether the state wants you to or not. Very obviously, making illegal addiction has not stopped people from getting addicted anyway. So as long as they're going to be using drugs anyway, they should be doing so in environments that lessen the likelihood of them transmitting diseases or getting sick from their injections. It'll reduce drug overdose deaths. It'll reduce the transmission of HIV.
So here's the thing. Vaush lives in Seattle. Does he not realize that not every city in the United States is like Seattle? I mean, Seattle is kind of a dump. When I last visited Seattle, people were openly prostituting themselves on street corners. I saw a man drop his pants in front of a police officer and take a shit on the sidewalk. It was unbelievably dirty. There have been entire documentaries, and I think the most notable one is Seattle is Dying by Como News, which you can watch here on YouTube, which documents how the failure of Seattle to enforce its drug laws has caused this disgusting homeless epidemic. It's gotten so bad that at this point, every single park and street in Seattle is just covered in human feces and heroin syringes. Does Vaush just think that this is normal, that every city in the United States is like this? Because it's not. In the city where I live, we don't have these same sort of social problems that seem endemic in Seattle, San Francisco, or other similar parts of California. If safe injection sites don't contribute at all to drug use, then why is it that all the cities that offer this type of service are cities that have enormous homeless populations and major drug addiction problems? If you'd like to hear more of my thoughts about this video, I did a pretty entertaining video called the NPC Zombie Apocalypse. So check it out if you haven't seen it.
We must end the school-to-prison pipeline. Black students, even in preschool, are nearly 4 times as likely to be suspended as white students, putting them at greater risk of falling behind and getting caught up in the juvenile justice system. Black and brown students and students with disabilities are more likely to be subjected to exclusionary discipline measures than their peers. When a child is pushed out of school, they lose instructional time and are more likely to become involved with the juvenile and adult justice systems. Just so you guys know, race realists love this shit. They love this, black people, are fucking chimpanzees always fucking aping out in schools, constantly getting suspended. There have been studies showing that, like, teachers systemically, that, like, school police officers, resource officers, teachers, principals, deans, all of these people who are involved in the process of suspending a student, that these systems are racist as fuck.
Actually, I'm not aware of any studies that say the reason that black people underperform in schools or society is because teachers are racist as fuck. In my experience, public school teachers are some of the most progressive people that you could encounter. I'm pretty sure Vaush would not be able to prove the veracity of what he's talking about right here. How is Bernie Sanders possibly going to solve this issue in a way that's fair? Let's say that Bernie Sanders advocates a policy where black students are not treated like criminals. They don't get in trouble, suspended, or kicked out of school no matter what they do. So then you have these students who are constantly disrupting class, constantly committing crimes, committing acts of violence against the other students. Are we supposed to just tolerate that? If you are a black student in one of these schools and one of your classmates act this way, are you just supposed to deal with it and just accept a lower quality education? Vaush just wants to focus on the kids who get in trouble. But what about all those kids who don't get in trouble? They just want to go to class and not get harassed or beat up by some other kid. It's easy for Vaush or Bernie Sanders to complain about the fact that black students are more likely to get kicked out of school or suspended, but they ignore the fact that there's a reason why these things happen. The government can't just wave a magic wand and make everything equal, and it's naive for someone like Vaush to think that this is possible.
Abolish long mandatory minimum sentences and life without parole sentences for youth. Imagine being under 18 and getting a life without parole sentence.
The only time a juvenile is going to receive a sentence of life without parole is after being convicted of committing a first-degree premeditated murder. The demographic group most likely to be killed by a juvenile murderer is going to be another juvenile. What the appropriate punishment is for a juvenile who commits a premeditated murder is probably best decided on a case-by-case basis, but for Vaush to act like it's unfathomable that a juvenile get a life without parole sentence for premeditated murder just boggles my mind.
Incarcerated trans people would have access to all the healthcare they need. Hear that, folks? All my fucking transes in chat? Just rob a bank and you'll get your boobies.
Yes, of course. Let's reward criminals who commit crimes by paying for all of their plastic surgeries. It's ridiculous that taxpayers should be on the hook for plastic surgeries for transgendered people. And it's also unfair. I literally just made a video on taxpayer-paid transgender surgeries. So I'm going to go ahead and direct your attention to that video if you're more interested in this argument. I really don't feel like making the same exact arguments that I made in a video that I posted just literally like 3 days ago.
We will re-enfranchise the right to vote to millions of Americans who have had their vote taken away by a felony conviction. Keep in mind, by the way, the Republican Party has been working for decades to suppress the votes of people who do not typically vote for them. If we cast aside those laws, the Republican Party would never vote again. They would never win again. They would never win a presidential election again. Not for 100 years.
For this reason alone, you should be opposed to Bernie Sanders' criminal justice reforms. These are radical reforms that are looking to basically destroy democracy in the United States and make it impossible for Republicans to win office. If you want to live in a one-party state, like some sort of communist country, like Vaush does, then I'm sure this sounds fantastic to you. But for this reason alone, if you are a centrist or a right-leaning individual, then you should absolutely oppose this sort of radical criminal justice reform movement.
Ban the box by removing questions regarding conviction histories from jobs and other applications. I am very much in favor of this, by the way. I know that a lot of businesses are like super duper fucking hesitant to hire somebody who has a previous felony connection, and like reasonably though. Why?
Well, I can think of a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to hire a convicted felon. Now, obviously, ideally, the employer looks at what the job responsibilities are and what the specific felony offense is and makes a determination based on those two factors. But there are a lot of jobs out there, like let's say cashier, where there is one quality above all else that the employer is really looking for, and that's an employee who won't steal the money. If you hire someone as a cashier, the most important thing, the key part of their job is don't steal the money. And if this person has a bunch of convictions where they stole money, then it makes a lot of sense why that employer wouldn't want to hire that type of person. Now, if the job was just, let's say, a job where you moved boxes around, then okay, assuming those boxes aren't valuable or anything, maybe you could employ someone who's a convicted thief to do the job. But there are a lot of positions where people have access to money. And if they've stolen money before, that's pretty relevant in determining whether they should be hired to do that job. There are also certain workplaces where employees are going to deal with vulnerable people. Think of nursing homes, hospitals, places where employees are supposed to take care of other people. You wouldn't want to hire some violent or neglectful person to do one of those jobs. If some person has a bunch of child abuse convictions on their record, they have no business working at a hospital where their job is to take care of children or other patients.
Like, is there any evidence out there that, like, people who once committed a felony are now more likely to go and steal from the job or something?
Yeah, there is a huge amount of evidence. In fact, we compile detailed statistics regarding reoffense rate. According to our best statistics, 76.6% of people convicted of a felony end up reoffending and committing another felony. That means that more than 3/4 of people convicted of a felony will commit another felony. That's a huge correlation.
If you know someone who's been sexually assaulted, at least for the people I know who have been sexually assaulted, the person who was assaulted is normally like, I just want anything to happen to keep this from ever happening to anyone again. But it's usually like all the guys that are surrounding that person who are like, Anyone who has ever even thought about sexual assault at any point in their life deserves to be dropped in front of a fucking racetrack and ran over until their organs are decorating at least half of the length of the asphalt, or some shit like that, you know, like some hyper-performative, like, extremely punitive, like that kind of shit, you know? But usually, at least in my experience, the people who actually experience that shit don't care so much.
This seems awfully anecdotal and self-serving. While Vaush might be correct in that sexual assault victims think that the most important thing is that no one else be victimized by the person who victimized them, in my experience, people who have been raped or sexually assaulted also want justice for what happened to them. They want to see the person who raped them get punished. I know Vaush probably would struggle to understand this point of view, but people who are victims of crime generally want some sort of retribution for the harm that was committed against them. You see, humans are hardwired that way. When people do nice things to other people, they want to repay the favor. And when someone does something horrible to another person, they want to see something bad happen to that other person in exchange. This is just part of being a human being. But sometimes I don't think Vaush understands what being a normal human being is actually like.
Address gender-based violence on college campuses by reversing Betsy Davis's decision to weaken Title IX protections. We will protect and enforce Title IX.
All of this talk of reversing Title IX policies just means that Bernie Sanders wants to revert back to the Obama-era kangaroo courts on college campuses. It's going to reintroduce the concept of affirmative consent, where if someone has sex with another person, the burden of proof is going to be on the defendant, the guy who's accused of committing the sexual assault, to prove that the woman consented. Which of course is going to be impossible in most cases because guess what? Women don't sign contracts indicating that they're consenting to sex acts. No sane person does something like that. But that's what Vaush is advocating for here. That's what he wants to see on college campuses, affirmative consent policies.
Immediately reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act.
Here's the problem. You can't just immediately reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. It was found unconstitutional. Now, I understand that Vaush is pretty ignorant about legal issues, so let me explain this. The United States has enumerated powers. That means the United States government cannot do anything it wants. It's not like the state in the fact that the federal government doesn't have just general police powers. It's limited to do the things that the Constitution allows it to do. Now, a lot of federal laws regarding firearms and drugs have been upheld as part of the Interstate Commerce Clause. According to Supreme Court opinions, because drugs and weapons are transported through interstate commerce, it's acceptable for the federal government to prosecute people involved in these types of crimes. However, the Violence Against Women Act basically made domestic violence into a federal crime. It has nothing to do with interstate commerce, and it's not something that's enumerated in the U.S. Constitution. There's nowhere in the U.S. Constitution that talks about domestic violence. Therefore, the federal government constitutionally doesn't have the power to pass something like the Violence Against Women Act. Even if Bernie Sanders becomes president and he gets Congress to repass the act, it's just going to get struck down as being unconstitutional a second time.
Prison is not a solution for social problems. We need to address the deeper structural problems that give rise to crimes such as joblessness, income inequality, lack of education, and untreated substance abuse.
Finally, Vaush and Bernie Sanders have said something that actually makes sense. Prison is not a solution for social problems. It's not the criminal justice system that's causing sky-high incarceration rates in the United States. It's terrible social problems that exist in our country as a result of an overly tolerant, overly pluralist, multicultural society, one which has no authentic culture. These are the true reasons why there's so much crime and incarceration in the United States. Reforming the criminal justice system will not solve any of these problems. We have to change our society and change our culture. Once again, I'm going to end on Patrick Deneen's quote. Trying to solve problems caused by liberalism by applying more liberal policies or procedures is akin to pouring gasoline on a raging fire. It will only make things worse. And that's what Bernie Sanders and Vaush's criminal justice reforms will do. They will only make these problems even worse.